James 1, 5 through 7. If any of you is lacking in wisdom, ask God, who gives to all generously and unbegrudgingly, and it will be given to you. I want to go back to this because some people look at this and they misunderstand because they think, oh, well, I can ask for anything. He says, if you are lacking in wisdom, ask God, and it will be given to you. Wisdom will be given to you. One of the things I explained to Tyler is that Tyler is really smart and he knows a lot of things, but he doesn't have a lot of wisdom right now because he doesn't know how to put all of this stuff together. And that wisdom comes through experience and through trial in his life. And when he goes through and experiences those things, he will become wiser. But right now, as an 8-year-old boy, he's not very wise. And he can't be because he's only 8, because he's not had that experience. He may know a lot of things, but until he's used it and worked it and found out how it works, it all won't come together and work for him. It says, but ask in faith, never doubting, for the one who doubts is like the sea, the wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For the doubter, being double-minded and unstable in every way, must not expect to receive anything from the Lord. So here we're talking about this relationship, this connection, and that if we go to God doubting, God's not going to respond. We have to go with a confidence in that relationship that God is there and God is going to give us this wisdom, this knowledge, this ability of facing these struggles and these challenges. He's not going to take them away. He's going to give us wisdom of how we can work through them and deal with them. You ever looked out across the sea? You know, a large lake. I mean, we got a couple of big lakes around here, you know, Lake Michigan. And you look across a large body of water. Have you ever been out in the middle of a large body of water where you can't see land? Is it really easy to get disoriented and not know what direction to go and what's going on because there's no landmarks? It's just everything is just kind of wiggling and waving, and how do you know where to go and how to get somewhere? And that's what happens in our doubt. It disorients us, and we lose track and we don't know which way to go. And that's why what he's talking about is if we're lacking in wisdom, in understanding of this situation, that's where we go to God, and he gives us that direction. He doesn't get us across the lake. He gives us a direction to go, to travel across that lake. James 1, 12 through 15. Blessed is anyone who endures temptation. I want to look at the tenses here. Blessed is anyone who has endured temptation. It says, blessed is anyone who endures. When you're in the midst of enduring temptation, you don't feel blessed. You won't. It'll be a struggle and it'll be a challenge. But blessed is one that has endured temptation, that has worked through it. Know that there is something better on the other end. No matter what the temptation, no matter what the trial, there is something better on the other end. We have won the war. We're just fighting these little battles. Don't lose the concept that we have won already with these little skirmishes that Satan keeps on throwing in our way. Each one has stood the test and will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. No one, when tempted, should say, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself tempts no one. God is not putting these obstacles and these struggles in our life. He uses them, and they become tools to strengthen us. But God is not putting them in our life. Satan in this broken world is, and that's who we're battling. God does not tempt us. He does not. He's not, we're not little Jobs out here where you're going to say, let's see how far I can push him. That's not what God is doing in our life. God is saying, I care about you, you're my child, and I'm concerned, and I want to be involved in what you're going through. Yet these temptations, the one thing we do when we get tempted and we're struggling, we immediately kind of separate ourselves from God. We either say, well, man, I'm just not good enough for God, or well, I'm struggling through this. Where are you, God? And we start separating. Well, that's exactly what Satan wants to do. He wants us to get in between and separate us from God. And that's why James is trying to tell us, consider it nothing but pure joy when you're struggling through these trials and these temptations and these challenges. Because God is in the midst. And God is there with you. But one is tempted by one's own desire, being lured and enticed by it. Then when that desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin. And that sin, when it is fully grown, gives birth to death. Why? Why would sin give birth to death? We all sin, right? We all fall short. The glory of God. That means none of us have got a chance. No, it's this concept that sin then will get in there and will separate us from God, and we will pull away from God and walk away from God. And then we will lose that eternal life because we've rejected God. Because out of our anger, out of our pain, out of our fear, out of our worry, we say, God, you're not there. You must not ever be there. Maybe you don't exist. Or, I'm angry with you, and we separate ourselves from God. This is what I see in what James is laying out. And sin is kind of like the carrot on the stick. How many of you remember that, the little carrot on the stick they would put out in front of the donkey or the horse, to get it to go? And that is what temptation is in our life. We never really get it, but it leads us in a direction that we shouldn't be going. We want those things, and that's what he's talking about here. Our own desire, we're tempted by our own desire, and we're enticed by it. And it just starts leading us out there and keep on leading it. And that's what Satan does. He sticks that little carrot out there, and we just keep on going a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And pretty soon we realize we're way over here, and God's way over there. And it's like, how did I get here? We have to understand that our trials and our temptations, it's not God trying to lead us away, but our own brokenness and Satan that's trying to pull us away. We've got to realize it. We've got to face the real adversary here. James 1, 22 through 25. But be doers of the word, and not merely hearers who deceive themselves. For if any are hearers of the word and not doers, they are like those who look at themselves in a mirror. For they look at themselves and, on going away, immediately forget what they were like. Do we do that? I think this is just really an interesting metaphor here. It's like looking in the mirror, and you glance in the mirror, and you comb your hair, and then you walk away, and you forget what you look like. It's the concept is that you just kind of glance, you look at it, because you're not staying there and staring at yourself. Of course, we wouldn't. Stand there and stare at ourselves. I wouldn't anyway. It burns my eyes. I can only look so long. But it's a concept of the familiarity that we have. How familiar are we? And this is what he's really talking about. And they go away and they immediately forget because they're not familiar. Because those who look at the perfect law, the law of liberty, and persevere, being not hearers who forget, but doers who act, they will be blessed in their doing. It's related a little bit different. Piano or the organ. They are here right now, aren't they? Isn't that beautiful music coming from the piano? Can you hear it? Can't hear anything, can you? There's nobody playing. Now I could sit down and play. and that's about all you would hear. Why? Because I've never practiced the piano. You know, Barb played some beautiful music on the organ today. How many years have you been practicing the organ? Should we say you're practicing, or are you just playing now? You've been playing a lot of years, haven't you? 30 or 40 years. It's a lot of years that she's been putting her fingers on the keys. And beautiful music comes out because she was a doer that acted. Because that's that practice. That is learning by rote. That's putting it into play. When we become doers of the Word, we start practicing the Word. When you first started playing the organ or playing the piano, you weren't very good. You probably sounded like I did, didn't you? Well, maybe not even that bad, but didn't sound that great. And all the things that we do in our life. You know, the things that we're good at, most of the things we've had to practice. Michael Jordan, the best basketball player in the world. He practiced a whole lot. He just didn't walk out and just immediately start playing. It's that being a doer helps us learn. Temptation comes in all forms. Henry taught me something a couple of weeks ago that I didn't know. He said that an apple, a worm doesn't crawl into the apple. The worm crawls out of the apple, right? Isn't that what you told me? That the worm is laid in there, and the apple grows around that worm, and the worm eats its way out of the apple. It doesn't eat its way into the apple. Do you know that? Isn't that neat? Isn't that something? You know, here we've got these apples, and you always, you look on that apple on the outside, oh, it looks pretty good. Right? There's no wormholes. Because he's already inside, right? And he's eating his way out of the apple. I thought that was kind of interesting. You know? This is one of my favorite jokes, so I'm going to say it. Some of you heard me say it already. What's worse than finding a worm in your apple? Finding a half a worm in your apple. But temptation comes in all forms, in all ways. And it may look good on the outside. But when you open it up, you can see that it's not. And that's what happens with temptation. It looks good on the surface. It may be something that looks good, or it looks nice, or that will feel good, or I'm just tired of fighting this fight, and I'm just going to let go and have at it. And we fall to temptation because it looks good. But there's a reason why God has laid out these things and said, don't do these things, because they're really harmful for us long term. It's that worm inside the apple. It says, don't let it start. Don't fall into these easy ways of attitude and of life. God gives us other options. You know, the apple looks good, but look at it now. It's just one of many fruits, right? And there's a lot of other things I'd rather eat than the apple in there. If we start just saying, oh, this is what I want, start looking around. If you're feeling tempted by something, you're feeling tested and tempted, just don't look at that one thing. Start looking around at all the other things that God's putting in your life. And you'll realize that He's giving you a whole fruit basket. Don't worry about the apple because it's got a worm in it. Here's a whole fruit basket of great fruit. Utilize that. Look at the things that God is putting in your life. Because He's putting a lot of good things in your life.